In the shadowed valleys of Appalachia, where coal seams snake through mountains like veins of forgotten curses, 9 markers stand silent in the overgrown plot behind Blackridge Hollow's abandoned chapel. Each bears the etched name of a mine baron who perished between 1902 and 1906. All fell by what the coroners deemed collapses of the spirit. Sudden catatonia, followed by a fading that mimicked the earth's own indifferent swallow. These were not mere endings, but the culmination of a deeper erosion, where the weight of accumulated sins pressed down like overburden on fragile supports, until the core gave way without warning. Yet in 1947, as workers cleared the site for a new rail line, they unearthed truths that the valley's powerful clans demanded buried anew, for the revelations threatened to crack the foundations of their inherited empires. Within those 9 caskets, the lining showed frantic gouges from tools not meant for escape, marks that spoke of a futile rage against the enclosing dark, and the remains twisted in postures of eternal plea, limbs contorted as if still straining against an invisible crush. What emerged next would echo through the hollows like a miner's last gasp, a reminder that the ground remembers every trespass. A bundle of weathered ledgers concealed in the roots of a gnarled hemlock that overlooked the old shaft entrances, pinned in the precise script of Elias Crow, chronicling 5 years of deliberate unraveling that started with a cave's roar and culminated in 9 souls entombed in their own waking voids. These pages were not mere records, but a testament to the slow corrosion of a man's essence, where grief hollowed out chambers of the soul, leaving only the framework for vengeance to fill. Elias Crow began as a surveyor in the depths of Blackridge, mapping the labyrinthine tunnels where men chased black gold under the whims of absent overlords, their lives traded for the gleam of profit in distant boardrooms. The mines fed the furnaces of distant cities, but devoured the lives of those who delved them, all under the governance of the consortium. A cabal of investors who viewed workers as expendable as the timber shoring their profits, discarding them when the cost of maintenance outweighed the yield. Blackridge in the early 1900s pulsed with the rhythm of picks and the coughs of dust-choked lungs, where grand lodges perched on ridges above shanty towns huddled in the fog, the divide as stark as the line between daylight and the perpetual night below. The medical tent, a makeshift haven amid the grime, drew respect from the weary diggers who sought remedies for the black lung that claimed them young, of affliction that turned breath into a rasping plea and futures into shallow graves. Dr. Harlan Voss had set up his outpost in 1898, gaining favor among the barons for his discreet handling of accidents that might tarnish ledgers, his reports smoothing over the jagged edges of reality to preserve the illusion of order. His prowess owed much to his aide, Elias Crow, a freedman's son with an uncanny grasp of subterranean airs and herbal palliatives, a knowledge that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, as if the mountains whispered their secrets to him alone. Elias had been hired from the ranks of orphan laborers after proving his worth in averting a gas pocket disaster through keen observation of seam whispers, those subtle shifts in pressure that foretold catastrophe to the attuned. Knowledge inherited from ancestors who navigated hidden paths in older, darker times. Remedies blended from mountain roots and valley vapors that eased the crush of stone on flesh. Salves that drew out poisons and bindings that held fractured bones in silent vigil. Elias stood unbowed, with eyes that pierced the gloom like lantern beams, schooled in clandestine readings from pilfered tomes before laws clamped down on such enlightenments. For the powerful feared the light of understanding in those they deemed beneath notice. His command of pressure charts and toxin lore even awed Dr. Voss, who leaned on Elias for concocting stabilizers and aiding in grim extractions, procedures where the line between salvation and surrender blurred in the dim lamplight. The barons who consulted Voss grew accustomed to Elias's steady presence, often summoning him for his soothing counsel amid their own afflictions. Nervous strains from boardroom battles, or the tremors from overindulgence in opulent isolation, maladies that revealed the fragility beneath their armored exteriors. But Elias's existence hadn't always been bound to the tent's canvas walls. where the air hung heavy with the scent of carbolic and despair. For 3 decades prior, he dwelled in the shacks lining Dead Man's Gulch, wed to a woman named Leora and father to 4 offspring, 3 sons and a daughter. In a lean-to that defied the perpetual drizzle, a fragile sanctuary pieced together from salvaged planks and unyielding hope. The consortium tolerated this kin because Elias's foresight had preserved crews during methane blooms and floods that could halt production for weeks, his interventions saving fortunes in downtime and replacement costs. Elias's acumen spared innumerable souls, miners and overseers alike, meriting a rare nod of deference in a world that ground men to powder, where dignity was a luxury afforded only to those who owned the grindstones. He devised barriers against cave-ins, using woven fibers and predictive markings, merging folklore wards with the sparse science gleaned from overseers' discarded manuals, creating systems that held back the earth hunger just long enough for men to escape its jaws. The barons had even called upon him to inspect their private ventures, a grudging acknowledgement of his utility, though it came wrapped in the condescension of those who believed utility equated to ownership. Yet this fragile equilibrium shattered in April 1901, when Harlan Thorpe's ledger deficits compelled him to slash supports in the deepest vein to accelerate yields, a decision born of desperation that echoed through the hollow like a distant blast. The cuts included Elias's kin, who labored in the auxiliary drifts, Leora tending the mule carts with a quiet strength that belied the exhaustion etching her features, the children hauling slate in small hands that should have held only dreams, to offset mounting debts from speculative ventures gone sour, gambles on untapped seams that crumbled under their own ambition. A routine efficiency, the barons claimed, that splintered households as surely as dynamite blasts, reducing bonds to mere entries in a balance sheet. Elias beseeched Thorpe, proposing to forfeit wages or map uncharted extensions gratis if his blood could stay united, his voice steady but laced with the undercurrent of a man staring into the void. He floated schemes of moonlight shifts in rival claims to bolster revenues, offers that laid bare his willingness to sacrifice himself for the whole. But Thorpe, besieged by lenders baying for blood, dismissed all overtures, his eyes cold as the coal he coveted. The reallocations commenced April 12, 1901, in the Central Depot, unalterable as the mountain spine, a process that moved with the mechanical inevitability of conveyor belts. Dawn broke sodden and thunderous that day, with mists coiling from the peaks as if the land mourned the impending fracture, the air thick with the promise of rain that would turn paths to quagmires. Elias had passed the prior eve cradling his brood in the shack's dim, imprinting their essences, their sense of earth and innocence, their murmurs of half-formed questions, aware that light would herald dissolution, separation as final as a collapsed tunnel. Leora, bound to him for 17 years, held firm, channeling resolve into fortifying the young for the unknown, her hands moving with the practiced grace of one who had mended countless wounds. 12-year-old Jonah, the firstborn, mirrored Elias's acuity and fascination with the earth's secrets, his mind a map of curiosities that extended beyond the visible horizons. 10-year-old Reuben shared his sire's tranquil essence and knack for mending fractures, frequently scouting fissures with him, his small frame belying a wisdom that seemed inherited from the stones themselves. Their daughter, 7-year-old Mira, with eyes wide as cavern mouths, and the youngest 5-year-old Seth, whose laughter had once echoed like a rare vein of light in the gloom, grasped at their mother's skirts with primal dread, sensing the rift though its depths eluded them, their instincts sharper than any surveyor's tool. As the overseers rounded up the reassigned, Elias stood impotent as his lineage was herded on carts with a dozen other clans rent by Thorpe's exigencies, the scene a tableau of quiet devastation where resignation masked the storm within. Wails blended with vows of reunion, hollow salve for the abyss yawning ahead, promises that hung in the air like dust after a blast, settling but never truly gone. But the abyss deepened en route to the redistribution yard, the journey a descent into further torment. Midway, a cart axle splintered on jagged outcrop, pitching the load askew, the crack resounding like a judgment from the depths. Amid the chaos, Leora tumbled, her form crumpling against unyielding granite, the impact a dull thud that reverberated through Elias's being even as he was held back. Crimson seeped, staining the earth like an accusation, and Elias, fettered by protocol and the chains of his station, strained futilely toward her, his cries swallowed by the indifferent wind. The overseers, fixated on quotas and schedules that brooked no delay, deemed her expendable and commanded the convoy onward, their voices flat as ledger lines. Elias's roars rent the air as they abandoned her fading form in the muck, her breaths growing shallow under the uncaring sky, but comrades restrained him, cognizant that defiance invited collective ruin, a cascade of punishments that would bury more than one. At the yard, Elias endured the dispersal, Jonah consigned to a powder crew in volatile shafts prone to blasts, where the air hummed with the potential for sudden erasure. Reuben to a ventilation gang in sulphurous depths infamous for choking the unwary, passages where light feared to tread. Mira and Seth, tender for toil, were dispatched to distant mills as sweepers, vanishing into the web of indenture threading the valleys, their small forms swallowed by the machinery of progress. Through it, Elias donned a mask of acquiescence, aware that eruption would compound woes, his face a stoic map hiding the fractures below. Internally, a chasm gaped, wider than any mine shaft, a void where love had been excavated and left empty. The one who mended breaches, who coaxed life from the crush, beheld his core pulverized by the indifferent machinery of gain, where kin were tallaged to tally sheets, valued only in terms of output and obsolescence. Dr. Voss, oblivious to the fracture's breadth and the shadows it cast over Elias's every action, enlisted Elias chiefly for his subterranean savvy, investing steeply in an asset renowned for averting calamities, his purchase a calculation as cold as the Baron's own. Whispers from pit bosses had lauded Elias's prescience, and Voss craved such to bolster his standing amid the elite, his practice a bridge between the grime and the grandeur. As Elias was escorted from the yard to Voss's outpost, he glanced back at the dispersal ground where his essence scattered like slag from a tipple. In that instant, a glacial resolve crystallized within, an endurance to observe, assimilate, an exact equivalence for the void inflicted, a patience forged in the fires of loss that would burn slow but inexorably. That dusk, in the loft above Voss's, tent serving as his berth, a space cramped with the ghosts of what was lost, Elias initiated entries and ledgers salvaged from the tumult. By flickering wick, in the meticulous notation honed in secrecy, he inscribed lines that would steer his ensuing years, words that anchored him amid the drifting mists of grief. This day, I beheld my bloodline entombed by the indifferent, and I stood voiceless. Yet I persist, etching every countenance, every decree, every echo that mocked as my foundation crumbled. They deem me shattered, but they've merely instilled forbearance, a lesson in the long game of shadows. The seasons post-arrival blurred into regimens of assessments and ameliorations, each day a layer added to the facade, while the inner workings shifted toward purpose. Elias executed tasks with unerring poise, charting vents, brewing tonics, aiding in rescues that pulled men from the brink, his hands steady as the earth he knew so well. Beneath the veneer, he pursued a parallel inquiry, dissecting Blackridge's power lattice and the barons who frequented Voss's care, mapping their vulnerabilities as he once mapped tunnels. Voss, a solitary figure in his 60s plagued by respiratory frailties that mirrored the miner's own, depended profoundly on Elias's proficiency, his trust a key that unlocked doors Elias would use in ways unforeseen. The doctor's quivering grip hindered precision, rendering Elias's firm touch and vast repository of countermeasures vital, a reliance that grew like roots seeking water in parched soil. Crucially for Elias's designs, Voss delegated autonomous consultations for recurrent woes, especially among the elite burdened by the weights of their empires, sessions where Elias could observe the cracks in their armors up close. Blackridge's overlords, habituated to superior succor, initially regarded Elias with aloof patronage typical of their strata, their interactions laced with the assumption of superiority. His evident mastery and deferential air, however, cultivated reliance pivotal to his schema, a trust earned through acts of apparent benevolence that masked the gathering storm. They solicited him expressly, extolling his intuitive grasp of their burdens, unaware that each visit added to the ledger of their undoing. In this span, Elias systematically unearthed the lineages of every patron, delving into the strata of their existences with the precision of a core sample. He gleaned their dealings, alliances, and paramount, their roles in the reallocations that sundered his kin, piecing together the web of complicity that spanned the hollow. Via subtle exchanges with shanty dwellers who serviced the lodges, whispers passed in the dim hours when guards slumbered, he amassed dossiers on the figures complicit in or enriched by the yard's dispersions, names that became anchors for his resolve. His scrutiny unveiled Thorpe as but a cog in a vaster apparatus of exploitation, a machine oiled by the sweat and blood of the unseen. The depot functioned with the endorsement of the Hollow's esteemed, who chaired benevolent societies while commodifying lives as or quotas, their philanthropy a thin veil over the chasms they dug. These were the souls who convened in opulent halls to ponder progress and ethics, their fortunes hewn from the pulverized dreams of clans like Elias's, discussions where humanity was abstracted into assets. Among Voss's regulars, Elias pinpointed 9 architects of his kin's erasure, each a pillar upholding the edifice he sought to undermine. Some had overseen the yard, apportioning fates with the detachment reserved for resource allocation, their pens signing away lives as casually as invoices. Others bankrolled the operations, advancing capital to foremen who fragmented bonds for yield, their investments bearing fruit stained with separation's bitterness. A handful had absorbed labor from that very dispersal, perpetuating the cycle that deemed lives fungible, their mills and shafts echoing with the silenced cries of the displaced. As 1901 waned into 1902, Elias embarked on what he termed his subterranean erudition, a descent into knowledge's darker veins. Voss's compendiums detailed atmospheric poisons, delineating agents inducing stupor, immobility, or death facade while sustaining inner vigilance, texts that spoke of the Earth's own arsenal against intruders. These volumes, intended for salvage, became Elias's doctrine and retribution's alchemy, pages turned in the dead of night when the world above slept. The pivotal revelation lurked in a tract on cavern gases, depicting a distillate from fungal spores thriving in Appalachian depths, but replicable in sealed chambers by a local herbalist supplying rarities to collectors, a substance that mimicked the slow suffocation of a sealed shaft. This essence, refined aptly, provoked utter bodily lockdown while preserving awareness and sensation for protracted intervals before lethality ensued, a state where the mind wandered lost in its own catacombs. Elias devoted moons to sourcing and propagating the spore, procuring strains from the cavern of Ephraim Lang, who lectured on natural perils at the Regional Academy, his enthusiasm for the macabre a blind spot to Elias's intent. Lang, ignorant of Elias's intent, welcomed a kindred spirit in fungal lore and permitted aid in his chamber cultivations, sharing specimens that would become instruments of equity. Via trials on vermin, Elias calibrated the quantum for effect, observing their still forms with eyes that saw not cruelty, but balance. Insufficient yielded fleeting lethargy, excess swift end, but precision forged a mimicry of demise to all but adepts, granting victims epochs to confront the void's embrace, hours where thoughts circled endlessly in the dark. The mental forging for his intent demanded rigor, eclipsing the chemistry, a tempering of the will against the horror of what was to come. Elias sustained his composed facade while stealing for spectacles antithetical to his mending ethos, nights spent in contemplation of the moral strata he traversed. He rationalized via ledger recitals of his offspring's names, evoking their doom and the Baron's callous complicity, each repetition a reinforcement against the erosion of doubt. As autumn chilled 1902, Elias designated his inaugural quarry, Baron Silas Reddick, a coal magnate who not only directed the dispersal where Elias's kin fractured but boasted of the efficiencies in child reallocations. His words a poison more toxic than any gas. Reddick endured chronic vapors from inspections and consulted Voss quarterly for respirants offering fleeting respite, his complaints a litany of self-inflicted woes. His predictable summons, faith in Elias's expertise, and solitary arrivals rendered him prime for Elias's orchestrated descent, a target whose isolation mirrored the solitude Elias now endured. Yet Elias compelled restraint, cognizant that impeccability and interval were keys to evading scrutiny and delivering equity to all nine, a patience that allowed the plan to settle like sediment in still waters. In his ledgers, he profiled each mark with clinical detachment. Ailments, timetables, entwinements in the depot's machinations, entries that wove a narrative of inevitable convergence. These notations resembled survey logs, yet outlined a therapy not of restoration, but of immersion in the helplessness Elias's young endured as their world caved, a descent into the same abyss from a different incline. The metamorphosis of Elias Crow from pathfinder to deliberate voidbringer unfolded across 1902's entirety, a year where the seasons turned like pages in a forbidden tome. Every facet demanded flawlessness, every hazard anticipated, every flux governed, for failure would not only end his arc but leave the guilty unburdened. His marks weren't solitary. They anchored the Hollow's order, their demises inviting probes from elite examiners and pressures to unearth causes, investigations that could expose the fissures in the facade. Elias's initial stride entailed cementing indispensability in Voss's outpost, extending hours to prep gear at dawn, cataloging at dusk, exhibiting zeal that elevated his counsel in Voss's eyes, a dedication that became the scaffolding for his true work. This burgeoning credence proved essential for solo engagements sans oversight, moments where the mist could be administered without witness. Refining his lockdown distillate spanned moons of peril, a process fraught with the risk of self-entrapment. In a rear alcove, ostensibly for herbal brews augmenting Voss's regimens, Elias nurtured spores and honed extractions, the air thick with the earthy scent of growth and decay. The labor risked self-exposure. Thrice he inhaled traces, enduring transient entombment that foreshadowed his mark's ordeals, experiences that deepened his understanding of the terror he wielded. The final elixir, a translucent, scentless vapor integrable with inhalants undetected, a substance as insidious as the gases he once warned against. Dosed aptly, onset lagged 20 minutes, mimicking ailment escalation with torpor that blended seamlessly with existing complaints. Within the hour, total stasis gripped, yet the mark lingered sentient, perceiving all environs in a prison of flesh. Vital signs ebbed to imperceptibility sans advanced gauges, a silence that deceived the untrained eye. To era's practitioners, absent modern probes, such a state heralded natural expiry, a peaceful fade that masked the internal storm. Only spore savants could discern the vestiges of vitality in the shell, subtle signs like the faint warmth of trapped breath. Opting Baron Reddick as vanguard blended tactic and vendetta, his quarterly vapors affording cadence, his haughtiness fueling disdain that sustained Elias through doubts. Critically, Reddick resided secluded, save for cowed staff, diminishing odds of prolonged vigils or deep scrutinies post-passing. His isolation of vulnerability Elias exploited. His dossier masked ideally. Beyond vapors, he harbored cardiac whispers Voss tracked, irregularities that pulsed like warnings unheeded. Abrupt end would finger frailty, forestalling inquests that might probe deeper strata. On November 8th, 1902, Reddick presented griping of aggravated breaths from recent descents, his voice a rasp that echoed the miner's own. Voss, occupied elsewhere, tasked Elias with prelims and dosing, a delegation that had become routine but now carried the weight of fate. This habitual handoff furnished the aperture Elias awaited, a moment where the threads converged. As he readied Reddick's inhalant, Elias infused calibrated mists of his elixir into the chamber, the addition as subtle as a shift in air current. Decades of mapping steadied his poise as he traversed from guardian to harbinger, his expression unchanging as the mountain face. Reddick, habituated to Elias's ministrations, inhaled sans query, the vapors slipping in like an uninvited shadow. The ensuing dialogue seared Elias's psyche, a confession in the dim light of the tent. As the mist wove its web, Reddick faltered, Elias perched adjacent, intoning in his habitual balm that now carried the edge of judgment. "Baron Reddick, I am Elias Crow, and you orchestrated the fracture of my kin at the depot on April 12, 1901. You crowed of their utility in narrow veins. Recall that fracture?" Reddick's gaze, clouding in the grip, flickered recollection, then mounting abyss as comprehension dawned, a realization that widened the eyes like a sudden drop. He strained to summon aid, but voice and form betrayed, locked in the spore's embrace. Elias persisted in measured cadence, his words a slow drip eroding denial. "You're not gone yet, Baron. The mist has chained your shell, but your essence wakes. You absorb every syllable, every shift. Soon Voss will declare you claimed by your whispers, and tomorrow, interred in the chapel plot." Elias drew nearer, locking gazes that conveyed the depth of the void. "But true in lags hours post-entombment. You'll sense the soil's weight, the muffling, with eons to ponder your depot decrees. Then you'll grasp the crush my young knew, the helplessness of being buried under decisions not your own. Stasis consummated, Reddick a husk. Yet Elias discerned the frantic sentience in those orbs, the futile surge against the cage, a mirror to his own internal struggles. Elias verified vitals with mapper's precision, noting their whisper-thin veil, confirmations that the elixir held true. When Voss entered shortly, he encountered Elias vigilant beside the apparent remains, mien of due solemnity that concealed the storm's eye. "Regrettably, the Baron has succumbed, Doctor," his whispers overtook during dosing. Peaceful it seemed. Voss's probe affirmed, citing cardiac history as the culprit, his diagnosis a seal on the deception. Swiftly, the form was conveyed to Reddick's lodge for rites suiting a hollow pillar, ceremonies that paraded the facade of honor while ignoring the rot beneath. Elias observed the rite from the fringes, as soil cloaked the casket, each layer a step closer to the Baron's private abyss. With each thud, he mused if Reddick persisted aware, the sounds a dirge for the unrepentant. No elation stirred, merely the chill of balance tipping, a shift in the earth's ledger. That eve, his ledger bore, Baron Reddick has metered his due. 8 linger. Equity tarries, yet inexorable, a promise that sustained through the lengthening nights. Post-burial moons dragged, Elias vigilant for ripples in the hollow's calm, whispers that might betray the undercurrents. Hollow whispers carried eulogies and legacies, sans queries on the passage, the death folded into the narrative of inevitable decline. Voss cited the case to peers as cardiac caprice, an example of how the body betrayed even the mighty. Elias's stature as adept aid held firm, unshaken by the event. This validation emboldened Phase 2, yet compelled reckoning with the psyche's freight, the toll of wielding such power. Despite moons of forging and convictions forge, witnessing the Baron's entrapment hollowed deeper than foreseen, a cavity where empathy once resided now filled with echoes. Sleepless vigils ensued, not remorse, but visions of the Baron's subterranean vigil, imaginings that circled like trapped air in a sealed vein. His second mark demanded temporal and modal variance to elude patterns that might attract the gaze of suspicion. He chose Magistrate Harlan Thorpe, the very architect of the reallocations, who had sanctioned kin severs as fiscal imperatives in ledgers and courts, his rulings a framework for fracture. Thorpe battled neural fires, intensifying over years, compelling frequent Voss consultations, his pain a constant companion that twisted his features into masks of endurance. His woes offered veil and venue, a canvas for the myth's artistry. Such fires could culminate in cerebral ruptures, and Thorpe's vintage lent plausibility to his sudden breach. Air implementation. A snag loomed like an unforeseen fault line. In February 1903, Voss Molden adjunct, Dr. Quentin Hale, fresh from urban academies, keen to root in Blackridge's niche, his arrival a potential floodlight on shadows. Hale's ingress meant amplified oversight, witnesses to Elias's dealings, hurdles in misdeployment that could collapse the plan. Alarmingly, Hale versed in emergent toxics detection, methods to unmask anomalies in the fallen, tools that pierce the veil of natural causes. Elias discerned acceleration imperative, a compression that risked instability but preserved the arc, compressing his arc from years to seasons risked exposure. Yet Hale's shadow demanded it, a race against the encroaching light. This haste birthed Elias's initial lapse, a miscalculation in the delicate balance of doses. Prepping Thorpe's session in March 1903, he overmissed the dose, the excess a drop too far. Thorpe's mimicry accelerated. Rigidity, so stark Voss noted anomalies, his brow furrowing in the lamplight. Peculiar, Voss pondered over the form. The lock exceeds rupture norms. And those eyes, raw desperation, as if the soul clawed at the bars. Elias's pulse thundered as Voss delved deeper than prior, instruments probing for truths Elias had buried. Moments of dread crested, scheme's veil teetering on the edge of revelation. Yet Voss's lore, air-bound and limited by the tools of the time, missed the spore's nuance, attributing the oddities to variant pathology. Concluding rupture variants, he sighed. Wretched soul must have endured agony at close, a lament that unwittingly captured Thorpe's ongoing torment. Unwittingly sketching Thorpe's extant torment, locked aware as rites prepped, his body a vessel for silent screams. Thorpe's rite drew grander assembly than Reddick's, befitting a ledger lord of decades, a procession that wound through the hollow like a vein of ore. Elias watched for margins as the casket descended near Reddick's, the ground claiming another architect of loss. As dispersal, Elias spied a figure jotting in a folio at the rear, his movements deliberate as a surveyor's marks. It was Silas Warden, chronicler for the Hollow Gazette, probing what he dubbed the elite eclipses, a cluster of abrupt ends among barons defying odds, a pattern emerging from the fog of coincidence. Warden had traced 6 moons of anomalies, explicable singly but suspect en masse, his inquiries a probe into the hollow's depths. Elias's ledger that night mirrored dawning peril. Magistrate Thorpe aligns with Baron Reddick in equity's grasp. Yet patterns stir shadows that may thwart fulfillment. Haste beckons, risks notwithstanding, a warning to the self that the ground was shifting. Elias's compressed cadence necessitated third mark swiftly, a strike before the fault widened. He targeted Commodore Vance Harlow, a rail tycoon who ferried outputs and inputs, including the depot carts, overseeing kin transports with quota zeal akin to freight, his efficiency a blade that severed without remorse. Harlow posed novelties. Robust, he sought Voss sporadically for strain abrasions from inspections, wounds that scarred the surface but left the core intact. Elias must fabricate occasion, crafting opportunity from the ether. Resolution emerged via shanty webs. Humble servers in ridge lodges traded master murmurs in the quiet hours, a network as intricate as the tunnels below. Elias learned Harlow hosted a summit for consortium heads on April 25, 1903, a gathering where plans for expansion would be hammered out like iron. The conclave afforded Elias to essay multiples while felling his prime, a convergence of targets in one confined space. Staff for such often drew from pools, and Elias bonded with preparers, his offers of aid accepted as the gift they seemed. He maneuvered insertion, granting access to Harlow and cadre, a position from which to observe and act. Meanwhile, Warden deepened his delve, haunting the plot, logging interments and dossiers with the persistence of a miner chasing a seam. His finds neared Elias's undoing, threads pulling tight. The eve of April 25th, 1903 heralded Elias's ark's crest, a pinnacle fraught with potential fall. Harlow's Ridge Hall convened 10 consortium pillars, prime for Elias's reconnaissance amid execution, their discussions a symphony of exploitation. He infiltrated via Agnes, veteran coordinator oblivious to his depths, appreciative of aid amid a contagion thinning her ranks, a fever that swept the shanties like a bad air pocket. The hall shimmered with brass and crystal as tycoons debated expansions and human throughput optimizations, their voices rising like steam from a vent. Elias glided spectral, replenishing goblets, gleaning discourses unveiling the machinery's ruthlessness, each word a confirmation of the system's rot. Harlow, burly in mid-50s with scarred paws from early delves, presided, recounting lucrative hauls and tactics for labor endurance in transits, his anecdotes laced with the casual dismissal of suffering. His expositions on quelling unrest and sustaining loads rendered him vile to Elias, a figure embodying the grind's indifference. As night deepened, Elias cataloged others' complicities, dialogues exposing a mesh beyond depot agents, a lattice of mutual benefit built on broken backs. They parsed lives with freight detachment, kin fractures as operational tolls, their laughter an echo that reverberated in Elias's memory. Chants arose in libation rounds, an infused cordial demanding per guest tailoring, a ritual that provided the veil for his act. In the scullery, Elias laced Harlow's dram with mist concentrate, absorbed seamlessly into the liquid's embrace. Harlow imbibed relishfully, lauding Agnes's craft as the vapor began its work. Within half-hour, onset, vertigo he blamed on spirits and stuffiness, a misattribution that bought time. As grip tightened, Harlow withdrew to his study, slumping an oak throne as elixir peaked, his form rigid as a toppled support. His unearthing 15 minutes hence spawned the scrutiny Elias dreaded, the discovery a crack in the plan's seam. Sans private fade, Tin beheld the fall, clamoring clarities that filled the hall with alarm. Dr. Elias Thorne, attendee, probed. Oddity abounds. Césure sans rupture signe. Rigidity evokes taint, a word that hung heavy as dust. Taint's utterance jolted the cadre, summoning more examiners by morn, rumor rife in hollow circles like wildfire in dry timber. Warden arrived pre-dawn, querying staff and guess afresh, his notebook filling with details that wove a net. His net snared Elias's presence, linking him to plural ends, a connection that tightened the noose. The snare tightened, mission partial. 5 marks lingered, scrutiny spiking odds against mist. Despair drove Elias's boldest gambit. Multi fell in unison, maximizing dread despite likely unmasking, a final blast to bring down the chamber. His lore pinpointed a secluded assembly on May 10th, 1903, where 5 consortium remnants would convene at the central vault to seal pacts for vein expansions, a meeting shrouded in secrecy. Evening post-hours afforded confinement, a space where the mist could spread unchecked. Elias's schema, ingenious terror, a plan born of necessity's forge. Nocturnal labors yielded bulk mist concentrate, quantities that filled vials with the promise of silence. Rather than singular doses, he'd infused the vault's ventilation, a central duct feeding chambers, turning the air itself into the harbinger. By injecting into the main, all inhaled lethal mists upon assembly, a cloud that would settle over them like fate's own fog. On May 10th, Elias lurked in shadows aft the vault, awaiting quorum, his breath measured as the ticking of a fuse. At 7:30, lamps flared, signaling commencement and traps trigger, the light an ironic harbinger of darkness. Silence fell in 20 minutes, the building a tomb of its own making. Elias tarried hour for full lock before King entry via pilfered duplicate, his steps echoing in the empty corridors. The chamber tableau horrified yet affirmed. 5 frozen at slate table, poses mid-debate, their forms statues in a gallery of dread. Eyes alone stirred, tracking Elias in sentient dread, pleas unspoken but vivid. He addressed each in clinical poise, unveiling identity and fate. Hours of aware entombment, soil's press mirroring kin's crush, a recitation that filled the air with unspoken judgment. Their ocular pleas, panic, denial, mute begs, yielded a grim fulfillment moons unprepared for, a moment where the scales tipped irrevocably. Yet triumph fleeting, footfalls echoed beyond, an intrusion that shattered the isolation. An intruder, defying surveillance, his presence a fault in the map. The portal yielded warden, delving leads to this nexus, his face a mask of revelation. So the architect unveils, warden murmured, blending awe and revulsion, his voice an echo in the chamber. You've orchestrated the eclipses, haven't you? Elias conceded the unraveling, standing amid the evidence of his work. No evasion viable amid the tableau. The truth laid bare as an open seam. They rent my lineage, Elias stated plain, his words a confession without apology. Scattered as slate, Leora left to fade and gulch. This equity, not eclipse, a distinction that hung between them. Warden's retort unveiled the hollow's fractures. Duty to unmask versus empathy for the grind spawn, a conflict that etched lines on his face. Strife stalled him, fates hinging on the balance. Those within, Warden gestured. They wake still, eyes betray it. You've caged them aware in husks, a observation that captured the essence of the horror. Elias affirmed, pointless to veil what was evident. They'll echo my young's fracture, epics Teru Depot edicts, akin to Cart's interminable dread, a parallel drawn in the dim light. Warden's folio, unearthed eras later in his abode's overhaul, captured the exchange, a dialogue that revealed the human under the chronicler's role. The chronicler torn, expose the harbinger or honor the genesis. I cannot permit continuance, Warden resolved after a pause that stretched like a tense cable. Yet neither ignore the forge. Those profited from kin as quotas. In equity's realm, repercussions due, words that acknowledge the gray strata between right and retribution. Elias's rebuttal framed his ethos. Equity's realm would bar the fracture ab initio. Denied channels. I forge mine via their own grind's lessons, a philosophy honed in loss's crucible. The impasse shattered by external murmurs. Approaching probes, perhaps tardy attendees or alerted watchers, voices that intruded like water in a dry mine. Discovery imminent, Elias's path sealed, the end rushing in like a flood. Rear egress exists, Warden offered soft, a gesture of conflicted mercy. I could defer chronicle, grant flight to ridges, an offer that hung in the air. But Elias embraced terminus, mission truncated but not without impact. 5 felled, for unscathed to reap. The grind persists unaltered, but perhaps the echoes will stir something. No flight, Elias intoned steady. Let them unveil. Perhaps dissemination awakens that even the ground-down harbor thresholds, a final stand against the inevitable. Murmurs swelled, steps ascending facade, the approach a drumbeat of doom. Warden elected preservation of narrative over mercy, positioning to chronicle the breach, his pen ready to capture the fall. Constables erupted, confronting the enigma. 5 pillars rigid, expired yet anomalous, a scene that defied the natural order. Elias poised serene, resisting not, proffering full recital of deeds and mechanics. His confession a map to the truth. His deposition, archived in hollow annals, unraveled not merely the Eve's quintet, but 2 years' enigmas. Mist dispersal, marks tied to depot sins, all etched with mapper's exactitude, a record that exposed the hollow's underbelly. Elias Crow's adjudication stirred Blackridge's annals, less for culpability, confessed, than ethical quagmires on grind, equity, endurance's bounds, debates that simmered in the aftermath. Prosecution, helmed by advocate Leland Frost, framed as stark eclipse. laborer felling 9 pillars, execution to uphold order, arguments that reinforce the edifice. Defense, court assigned to reticent counselor Amos Reed, navigated admitting acts while positing justification via systemic pulverization, a strategy that cracked open the debate. Reed's tack, illuminate the grind's savagery birthing such retort, testimonies that painted the depot as a site of systemic horror. Proceedings bared depot mechanics, kin severances, quota cruelties, powerlessness, mirroring a society romanticizing benevolence amid exploitation, revelations that unsettled the gallery. Elias's accounts of kin's fracture, impotent witness, compelled pillars to face their edifice's toll, a confrontation that lingered in the air. Warden's Gazette dispatches ignited furor valley-wide, articles that spread like spores. Excerpts from Elias's ledgers, missed dissections, reprinted cross ridges to mills, the story a cautionary shadow. The ground down's alchemical turn to harbinger terrified overlords region spanning, a ripple that questioned the stability. Scientific circles fixated on missed facets, analyses that advanced the field. Voss, shattered by AIDS duality, testified on Elias's acumen and access, his words heavy with betrayal. Revelations of labor lore and toxins upended intellect assumptions, fueling curbs on tutelage, laws that tighten the chains. The 5 vault survivors testified starkly, their voices trembling with the memory. Varied ordeals, yet unified in aware entrapment, accounts that brought the horror into the light. Baron Elias Grant recounted, senses acute, form betrayed. As can mourn my shell, I yearned signal, but caged in corpse as rights advanced. If Crow sought to impart crush, he mastered it, a testimony that echoed through the court. Disclosure that prior 3, Reddick, Thorpe, Harlow, entombed sentience sparked outcry beyond hollows, a wave of doubt that led to exhumations. Kin valley-wide queried passings, demanding unearthings, straining examiners, breeding suspicion enduring for generations. Elias remained poised, unrepentant save for incompletion, his demeanor a rock amid the torrent. His court close, trained to chart paths, avert crushes. Yet when edifice entombed my kin deeming it quota, I discern mending lore yields equity too. No clemency plea, as none granted my blood. Condemn, but recall I forged not the grind necessitating such, words that hung unresolved. Jury's haste, guilty noose. Verdict inevitable for upheaval scale, order's mandate. Yet queries lingered on grind's viability, equity's absence, humanity's grind, seeds of change buried deep. Execution June 12, 1903, amid thousands, a spectacle that drew the hollow's gaze. Elias's gallows utterance, Warden penned, echoed, I depart knowing 5 tasted my young's fracture in soil's grip. Worth the noose. But grind endures, more kin crushed. Recall patient souls harbor, silence's end, a proclamation that lingered in the wind. Elias interred unmarked beyond bounds, per codes barring felons' hallowed earth, his rest a final exile. His ledgers, trial seized, vanished post-verdict, but duplicates preserve the truth. Warden, privy during coverage, duplicated ere return, his act a quiet resistance. Decades on, memoir prepping, he secreted originals under chapel hemlock near Mark's plots, a burial for the record. His 1935 account could not erase such equities chronicle, nor incite emulations. Future eyes, reframed on grind and equity, may fathom the dread necessity transmuting Pathfinder to Voidbringer, a reflection on the abyss. 1947's clearance unveiled ledgers with casket gouges, affirming Warden's verity, physical proof of the aware burials. Hollow authorities sealed, citing tensions, but whispers fingered clan shields for depot forebears, a cover for inherited guilt. Elias's echo rippled, ridges tightened on schooled labor, especially toxin-savvy, fearing the weaponized knowledge. Statutes barred texts, training, science, acknowledging enlightenment's peril, changes that reshaped the Hollow. Case spurred toxics forensics, advancing detections, aiding probes, a legacy in the shadows. Profoundly, it fueled grind debates, questioning the institution's core. If trusted Elias could alchemize revenge, what of Myriad ground down? The saga underscores resistance's quake in ironclad edifices, a tremor that persists. Elias Crow's equity affirms delay, breeds, not denial, but metamorphosis to terror's form, an unresolved weight that presses on.